Welcome to Building Stories, a podcast where we tell honest and sometimes funny stories about construction and digital transformation. We're joined today by Phil Walton. After more than 20 years on the org chart, Phil started his own consulting business 12 months ago, specialising in the prevention of harm and safety and health governance. Phil has worked and continues to work across a number of industries, including construction, major infrastructure, public sector and energy. He's based in Melbourne, Victoria, and has worked frontline crisis response during the COVID-19 pandemic. He has observed the complex disruption, global trends, and the new normal that confront the workplace that bring both risks and opportunities and require adjustments to traditional thinking. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Luke. Good to be here.
Yeah, we've got co-host David Broadhurst, aka Broady. Thanks for jumping in, mate.
No, you're very welcome. Looking forward to the chat.
I think you know Phil.
I think I know him.
All right, Phil.
He's a good
any
egg.
hints? Any hints, Phil, when you're growing up that you'd end up where you are right now? Any moments along your journey that you can reflect on?
Well, I grew up in Wales in the UK, so a long way away from where I am now. But when I was growing up, being in Wales, I was obviously surrounded by a lot of castles, and from a construction perspective, I always took an interest in castles. And the town I grew up in Wales, called Caerphilly, has the second biggest castle in Europe. It was built between 1230, 1300, I think, with a huge moat, a big portcullis. And I was always struck by the stonework and the workmanship and skills that must have gone into that to build it and to enable it to still be standing all this time later. So always became keenly interested in that blend of design and architecture and construction and materials. Very, very interesting stuff. And then obviously Lego, right? So as a kid, loved Lego like a lot of us, and tried to rebuild castles with Lego and things like that. So always sparked an interest with different forms of construction.
So from those early days, how do you kind of progress through from, schooling, education and into the industry?
Well, I started education actually in university with chemistry. So a bit of a science background. And that was simply because, so the school I went to, the headmaster taught chemistry, and that year, nobody had picked chemistry to go on and study in university, which I think the optics of which troubled him. So, he said, I think you should do chemistry. You'd be good at that. This was the late 90s. So off I went to uni and studied chemistry. At the time, the industry in the UK was saturated with science grads, and there wasn't much on offer, but there was a really differently minded professor who acquired funding to start a new master's degree, which he called Clean Chemical Technology or Green Chemistry, which now has sort of come to the fore. It was well ahead of its time. A lot of the other grads were doing industrial chemistry and so forth. So I managed to get a place on that course and study green chemistry. From there, I worked in chemistry for a while as an analytical chemist, and that's what got me into safety and risk. I moved to Australia in 2005, and my first job was with a consultancy looking at land contamination and water contamination, and then made a move into the energy industry after that, working a 2-and-2 roster on a site about 800 k's northwest of Brizzy, with the old Queensland Gas Company. So when I first got onto site, I was one of the first safety people working across civil construction, pipelines, rotating equipment, drilling, earth moving, and road manufacture. as well as cultural heritage and stakeholder relationships. So it was an incredible experience, being A, new to Australia, and B, new to the industry. And I got in there right on the front edge of that $200 billion investment in LNG. So saw everything scale on a massive level. Stayed in the industry for a while until the kids were born. That was 2015. And that precipitated a move down here to Melbourne. A job to get me home every night, Monday, Friday, instead of traveling a lot. And that was where I lunged into the construction industry. So started working CBD high-rise with Multiplex, and then went on to level crossing removals projects and major infrastructure with John Holland. So it was a challenge to move from one industry to the next, but obviously came with a lot of learnings and all the cross-disciplinary skills I picked up over the years stood me in good stead to make that jump across.
So you and Brody have a bit of shared DNA in this civil kind of utilities background.
Yeah, well, that's where we actually met. So I met Brody when I was at Maltese, and we worked with Jackie and Brody to bring in some visual learning, micro learning, for high risk tasks on construction sites. So we were scrambling against a deadline, and we had video footage being taken on site. I think we were at 447 Collins, weren't we, Brody?
I,
And
I think that's where we cut our teeth together, I think.
that was it. And then we'd scramble from the construction site back into the site office and had a green screen rigged up in the site office and had the people doing the interviews and the voiceovers, and it moved on from there.
Okay, so that was a real project. You're working together. And what was the trigger to do this? Like just a desire to do better, or was there some things that are happening that's like we need to change the way we're doing things, you know?
It was probably a combination of both. So there was a very good understanding of risk on the ground there, and there was a healthy appetite for innovation. So to try things that were different and maybe a bit forward thinking. And I think at the time, you know, it was booming times. We had about 20 separate projects on the go. So we were looking for a solution that would be scalable and could cover high volume and be automated. So that particular solution fit the bill. You know, it really worked well with Frontline because it wasn't document heavy. It was very visual. It was engaging. Every video was 3 to 4 minutes, and the way in which the videos were done, it actually drew on the expertise of the people who were doing the job. Like there's a novel thought. If you want to know the best way, talk to the workers and ask them questions. So it really drew those things out. And obviously Brody's skill set with Frontline and construction, you know, it gave him that natural ability to move between different crews with different jobs, and then also to interface with senior project management.
Yeah, nice. So there's appetite for innovation. And have you observed that always to be the case in the industry, or how's the industry kind of, you know, had that tension over the years?
Yeah, there's been an interesting tension. In some areas, it's been quite inert. So there's been a reluctance to try anything different or anything new. Certainly in recent times and post-COVID, that's kind of been turned on its head a lot. You know, a lot of traditional ways of doing things were turned on their head during COVID, particularly down here in Victoria, world's most locked down city. We had a lot of challenges to keep work moving through the lockdowns and the restrictions. And I think that forced people to start being more open-minded and to try different things and to look for different ways of doing things, and indeed across construction projects to open up shared learnings. So if we were grappling with something, we'd often draw into intelligence from other parts of the industry of what was being done on different sites to keep things going and to keep people safe.
And how would you gather that information? This trying to figure out better ways of doing things. Is it just through conversations, or how do you kind of keep improving like that?
Well, I think there was a very good network of senior leadership who were meeting routinely, almost in that sort of command structure, crisis response, emergency response environment. And so a lot of people were at the table listening to the same things, and they would then take that knowledge and bring it back to the organization that they were working with. I think what's happened over time is that way of working, people have realized there's benefits to it above and beyond navigating a pandemic, and sharing insight, sharing knowledge, having those lateral learnings move across projects. There's a lot of upside to that.
Hmm. So that pandemic precipitated innovation in some ways. Brody, do you remember that time period with the job you were doing at the time?
Yeah, well, I think we found that what we'd been doing for probably 12 plus years all of a sudden became the norm, um, because people were needing contactless solutions around sign in, sign out, inductions, training. So everything that was in our wheelhouse, what was a nice to have prior to COVID became very rapidly a need to have. And so it was nice that all the work that we'd done for 12 years prior to COVID all of a sudden became what people were looking for. So it was painful to get through the 12 years, um, because there's always reluctance. As much as people want innovation, it's like, well, we want it, but we're sort of comfortable with what we're doing. Um, to me, I always think about the hound dog laying on a deck that's on a nail, and it's howling because it's uncomfortable, but it's not too much uncomfortable that it won't move. Right? Our industry is a bit like that, right? Unless it's really uncomfortable or somebody tells us we have to do something, we're often a bit of a lagger when it comes to adopting good technology. But COVID really kicked us up the backside to say there is better ways of doing business across our industry, if the approach is right and people can see
Mm.
value in the tool.
Yeah, yeah. So Phil, as you went through this, utility, civil into multiplex, what were some of the challenges you face? Were you wrestling with this idea of people not wanting to change, or were you more kind of learning through those years of what you're going to kind of eventually deliver in your consulting business?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, and I always did have a long-term plan to do the consulting thing, but I think the time in construction accelerated some of that. Um, and look, I'll be a bit frank and fearless now and say that, you know, the migration out of construction into public sector was based on the fact that I got sacked. I yeah, had quite an abrupt end to one of the roles. Um, so much so that as I sit here today, my neck is still hurting because they didn't even bother to sharpen the axe. So there were challenges, right? And that in and of itself, getting sacked, don't know if any of your listeners have gone through that experience, but it's not that pleasant. But it teaches you a lot about your own durability and your own resilience. You've got to take stock, regroup, find a way out of it, move forward. Keep supporting the family, keep the career moving in a as positive a direction as possible, and you got to do a lot of soul searching. So that, in hindsight, was a very deep learning experience, far much so than when everything's going really well or being successful. Because as a previous mentor said to me, when you're winning, how do you know you're winning by design or just by luck? and what are you learning? So, so the getting sacked thing really forced a few changes, and that's what took me into the public sector. And it was so strange how it came about, because we were smacking between lockdowns. We were trying to get a bigger place because we knew we were going into a very long lockdown, and we needed more space. We needed a back garden for the kids and what have you. So we were moving rentals, and I was packing up all my stuff, and out of one of the boxes on my desk, a business card flew out in the middle of me packing up these boxes. And I gave this guy a call who I'd worked with a few years ago, and I told him, I said, look, I've just been done. Need something quickly if possible. He said, well, look, there's something going in government. They're standing up a crisis response operation. They are looking for people with frontline operational knowledge. And would you be interested? So I said, yeah, absolutely, I'd be interested. Now, years before, when I worked in the pipeline industry, from time to time, what I used to do as a corporate safety manager, I would engage a lawyer privately to give me advice on how I was doing my job, and the quality of the advice I was giving to the board and the executive, and where my blind spots might be, blind spots that I hadn't considered. So I'd engaged a lawyer in 2010. So as it turns out, for that role in the government, she was the hiring manager. Right? You wouldn't read about it. So I think I spoke to the recruiter on Tuesday. We had a chat on the Thursday, and I think I was on site at a public housing tower on Sunday morning. I mean, it moved incredibly quickly. And then that was basically it for the whole duration of the pandemic. I was working with the VPS and did a lot of frontline work, and then the department I was with went through machinery government, so they mogged, as they say, and that moved and shifted, and then ultimately, after everything calmed down, um, it was very different during COVID and the response, and then it settled into a different phase. And after that, that was time, I think, for me to get out and start consulting.
Yeah, nice. And is there a particular moment you can reflect on that you're proud of? Was it during that period when you're in the crisis response team, or was it some other time where you're like, I'm really proud I was part of this initiative?
Yeah, so I think maybe a slightly unorthodox answer to that question. What I'm proud of is, along the way, like all of us, um, there have been hazards and hardships. You had to take a few knocks, and there's been turbulence. Now, what I'm proud of is that I have not lapsed into that cynical, sarcastic, bitter mindset that you can often encounter with people who've been tuned up a bit, or copped a bit of flack over the years, right? So, working in safety in particular, when you have to navigate that mindset, it's extremely difficult because it's often completely immovable and intransigent, and it's an easy mindset to fall into. So, whilst there's been work that I'm proud of, the thing I'm probably proud of the most is the way I've guarded my own mindset, and invested in a commitment to good thinking over the years, to keep buoyant and to maintain a bit of optimism, and still to have a lot of, and Brody and I talk about this a lot, uh, have a lot of empathy and a lot of human compassion, just on a human level. So when you go about your work, you do so, almost with those values. And along the way, if you can help people, that's great. But a lot of that time is spent doing that work on your own mindset, and keeping your own self shored up.
Mm. I think that's a Brody, when you think about it, his what he's proud of is almost his ethics. What a humble view that is.
Yeah. Well, the thing and I've got a faith, right? Uh, which is, I carry that in a fairly unorthodox way. The people who know me. But it's called the prayer of Jabaz, right? And the prayer is about asking for a blessing. And there's a book written about the prayer, and this priest or pastor, whatever you want to call him, anyway, a leader of a religious organisation, somebody overhears him praying this prayer, and you think, oh, gee, that's a bit of a selfish prayer. But when the guy got a chance to explain it, he said, we've got to understand that we can't be a blessing unless we're blessed. Right. So I love Phil, right? Because you can't help people if you're not in a good state of mind yourself. Right. Everything, as much as it might sound selfish, but your self-care, your self-talk, your self-image, your mindset, it's critical, because if you don't take care of that and guard that, you can't be much help to anyone else. And I just love how Phil does life, that how can I become the best version of me so I'm in the best position possible to help others that might need a bit of support.
Yeah, totally. Phil, I know that you've observed a few things in the industry, and something that is a bit of a passion of yours is kind of knowledge and learning. If you look at the industry as a whole, what do you see as some of the challenges over the next decade or so?
Yeah, there's a global trend on this, and that is that there is an aging workforce who will migrate toward retirement in the next 5 years, 5 to 10, probably less, probably more so 5 than the 10, and they'll take with them into retirement a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of skills. You also have a big disruption to the generational demographics in the global workforce at the moment as well. With by 2035, I think, big majority of the global workforce will be Generation Z, and there are different views, perspectives, different learning preferences, and different ways of working. So one of the big challenges that I see is how to maintain organizational memory, things that have happened to organizations that they can learn from, and communicate that to new entry-level staff, and to weave it into the fabric of their culture and their storytelling, and how to keep the industry moving forward so that the mistakes of the past aren't re-executed. And there's a layer to this, because there's the easy stuff, which is the documents and the desktop stuff that you can see and you can touch, things like procedures and manuals and risk assessments and so forth. And then there's the more complex element of this, which is the tacit knowledge. And the tacit knowledge almost operates on an unconscious level, and sometimes people who have it aren't even aware that they're in possession of it. It's things they've learned over the years, things they may have picked up themselves, maybe during an apprenticeship, or if they were lucky to be mentored by somebody. And worst case is they've been involved in a really serious incident, and those learnings have stayed with them, and they have those locked away in their mind. So connecting the top layer who are about to go into retirement with the entry level layer, there's a natural thing that we've done in oral tradition, which is telling stories and providing knowledge and wisdom to younger members of the tribe, so to speak. We've been doing that for a very long time as a species, and there's a natural gravity toward that. And now, of course, that could be assisted and aided by technology to make that what we were just talking about before, which is to be moved across high volume, and to be scalable and to be accessible.
So telling stories, Brody, what's some of your experience of the best way to kind of deliver these stories between different teams and individuals?
I think the two key words are authenticity and humility. So, as an example, I was up in Ballarat yesterday as a guest lecturer for Fed Uni. They had a cohort of 35 people in from China, Guangzhou in China, and they're looking to learn from the Australian way of training people and how we do safety in Australia. So we got invited in as a more contemporary approach to doing that. And it was quite fascinating because people came alive when I told my lived experience stories. I didn't use statistics to try and communicate what I needed them to remember. And I'm just lucky that if I look at my DNA, I'm a natural storyteller. And that holds me in good stead that when you understand how to cognitively engage someone, people remember the narrative. They don't remember the statistics. If you go bullet point, after about the third bullet point, they've already, number one's dropped off as you're talking about number four. And again, it worked for Jesus, right? He never gave them bullet points. He just told stories, but people remembered the stories.
True. So Phil, not everyone is as kind of good at storytelling as Broady. So if I'm a executive, chief risk officer in an organization, how am I going to deal with this next 5 years? Like, do you think knowledge loss is already on my enterprise risk register?
Yeah, I've spoken to a cross section of industry, obviously, to gather insights on this topic, and a lot of people do have this at enterprise risk visibility. Of course, it's there. The question is, what is being done about it? And like every risk, it needs controls to mitigate the risk. And what's the strength and the depth of the controls, and how effective are they? And then, indeed, how do you measure? So, how do you measure how effective those controls are above and beyond an opinion? And that's probably where the current gap could be, and also, therefore, where the current opportunity could be.
So, without giving away all of your secrets, what advice would you give these people? Like, what do they need to do to explore in order to try and stay ahead of this issue?
Well, when people talk about knowledge management, often the biggest challenge they have is knowing where to start, because it is so broad. There's so much knowledge and information about different aspects of the business. Is finding a tether or an anchor to move into, to begin working through what the most important things are to capture, and then to curate them and to share them and so forth. So, and again, not to go too far into it and to give it all away, but there are other parts of the business that have a really good way of focusing on what the most important things are. And if you look at the reasonably practicable qualifier that is used in safety a lot, you can be fairly unapologetic on moving towards your highest risks first. So if you have a way of ordering your organization by way of risk, and you know what your top 10 risks are, if you are going to embark on a knowledge management project, it would logically follow that the knowledge should be based on your highest risks, as opposed to general knowledge and broad knowledge. And that way it could be integrated into other things and management systems that have already been established to manage those high risks. So I think specificity is a word I would use, and how you can be very specific with what knowledge you're capturing and why.
No, I agree. So one of the challenges the industry faces is a lack of having the information at their fingertips, the lack of structured kind of information. Like, how do you see the link between kind of that challenge in trying to connect with these risks?
Well, I think we're talking about an architecture and a platform, so a repository or somewhere that the information could be stored and then accessed, and then ways in which it is being shared and accessed could be used to generate further trends and metrics to inform how effective the overall endeavor is.
Hmm. One of the challenges with anything like this is if you've got an enterprise organizational approach, how do you actually get everybody engaged? And so, how do you see that happening? If at executive level you make a great call, you head down a path. How do you see that filtering through all levels? Right out to the guy swinging a hammer on site.
Well, look, and again, speaking frankly, it shouldn't be like this, but it is. So generally, and this isn't true of the public sector because they don't have this structure, but generally in the private sector, what moves the needle is what's on people's KPIs. So if someone's bonus is connected to a deliverable, they'll move heaven and earth to make that happen. If that KPI structure is integrated into an overall strategy or a strategic direction, um, then again that will get penetration and cut through.
Hmm.
So if the enterprise risks are aligned with what we've spoken about today, it should follow that a lot of organizations have already got this woven into their strategy. And therefore, it wouldn't be an external body or a party saying, this is important, you should do it. It would be the senior controlling minds of the business, the people that have power and authority to make decisions through a governance framework, and the people within the organization that people listen to. If they are advocating for this and speaking about it, to Brody's point, in an authentic way, then it is likely to get traction.
Yeah, I keep thinking about kind of the connection between all these strategies and the execution. My experience has been there's such a time lag between having a great approach idea and actually seeing it happen. Do you have any thoughts on how to compress the time between knowing that you've got to get somewhere and actually getting there?
Yeah, so what we're getting into now is a change piece.
Hmm.
And uh, when I was researching something else recently, I read John Cotter's book, A Sense of Urgency, just to refresh. And he wrote this, I think, in 2009. And in it, he says we should all be prepared for change to migrate from the episodic to the continuous.
Hmm.
And whilst change was infrequent in the past, it now seems to be constant. And the time lag that you're talking about often comes from the fact that you have multiple functions and disciplines on an org chart who are all running change programs at the same time, but the way in which they're connected and the way in which they communicate with one another and how they're sequenced might not be a well-oiled machine, and therefore the cogs can seize and rust. And then, what you're talking about happens. You get that huge lag. So by the time you execute, the thinking behind the strategy is already redundant.
Hmm.
So I think what we're talking about is cutting through to the heart of, if you were going to do something like this, how would you turn your mind to thinking about managing the change effort to ensure that the ground is laid and the sequencing is there and the priority is there, and even the way in which it would interact with other parallel change efforts in the organization, as well as the point of readiness. So, from a cultural perspective, how ready would an organization be to absorb this? And what would the pitch and the readiness be? Because let's say 5 years ago, they had the consultants in to do this knowledge management piece, and for whatever reason, it didn't work very well. As soon as somebody hears about knowledge management, they'll roll their eyes and say, oh yeah, just like that thing 5 years ago, we spent X amount of dollars, nothing happened. Why would I invest my trust and confidence in this endeavor when I already did that and I was disappointed?
Mm-hmm.
So all that stuff, I think, has to be looked at and explored in detail.
Yeah, Brody, it's a good point. Like, basically, we know this is a problem, but my response might be, oh, my organization's not worried about that. We're not ready to deal with that right now. What do you think is going to happen to my organization over the next few years if I've got that thinking?
You'll probably be obsolete. And I think Phil's absolutely right. I'm not a very learned person, but I've seen over my 45 years the power of words. And to Phil's point, if you look at statistics, over 80% of people in the last 15, 20 years who have been exposed to a digital transformation initiative, it's been a negative outcome. So you've only got about 15 to 20% of people who have experienced a positive digital transformation initiative. Knowing that, when we go into an organization of any size, I talk about the terminology being a digital renovation. One word reduces the heckles and the anxiety that takes place within an individual that won't even voice it. They won't even know why they have a response to the word transformation until you point it out to them.
I'm doing a renovation right now, and it is raising heckles for me, that word.
Well, you picked the wrong builder then.
Because I'm doing it myself. That's the problem.
but my explanation on why I've chosen a different word is, say, guys, a transformation, it's let's get rid of everything and start from ground zero, right? A renovation, someone who does a good renovation says, what do you like about the house that you want to keep?
Mm-hmm.
And what don't you like about the house that you want to replace? Right? So most people's experience with the renovation, yeah, it might be a bit disruptive, but it's not completely throwing them out of the house. There's a positive outcome that they've experienced from a renovation. Right. So again, it's about painting word pictures. It's about the narrative again. It's about linking people's feelings with a story that draws positive feelings, not negative feelings. And so, again, I'm always very careful of the words that I use when I go into these environments, because I've seen firsthand the difference when we talk about digital transformation or when we talk about a digital renovation. Renovation gets way better engagement and buy-in from the people who are going to have to experience a little bit of discomfort for a period of time, because they can picture, well, now I know what it's going to look like when it's finished. It's going to be better than what we've got right now. Yeah. That's most people. That's most people's lived experience with the renovation, right?
Yeah, true. Phil, what's your take on this? Like, technology seems to get in the way sometimes. Do you think that's what's stopping some of this happening, or not having the right tools?
There's often a missed piece right at the beginning, and this is where I really enjoyed working with the union, not only in construction but in the VPS as well, because they were very, very hot on consultation early doors with as many people as possible, particularly workers, the DWGs, and the HSRs, the health safety reps. And if people feel as though they're being, that their opinion counts and they're being invited to share their opinions and their ideas, and they feel like they are the co-architect of something as opposed to having something done to them, they generally work better, whether it's technology or whatever the outcome is. If that first early stage is done, it's like Broadie on site at 447. We went out and talked to the people who were closest to the work and asked for their input and respected their ideas and then turned them into action. And it was very, very successful because they felt as though this was part of something they were helping us to build, as opposed to something that they were being forced to do on top of their day job. And if you do that consultation, then the home run is when you find a pain point that people feel every day when they come to work. And if you can take that away, as opposed to telling them about this solution that you've dreamt up that you think is going to be good for them, you'll generally get some pretty good outcomes. So, it's a funny thing that I've ended up a consultant, because when I was on the org chart, I was pretty anti-consultant, because my experience was people would knock on the door, ask for a coffee, and then tell me what I needed. So there was a real absence of questions and engagement about day-to-day, what are your challenges and what are your pain points, what's hurting. And I still had a day job to do on top of anything else, project work and so forth. So if that front-end engagement occurs and you tap into what is really hurting and how you can help take that pain away, you're onto a good thing. And this links back into that readiness piece, because even the best offering in the world, if the organization isn't ready for it, it's all for naught. So it's as much about being able to assess the market and find out where you've got a match and where you've got compatibility and who's ready and why. And you only get that by asking questions. And they're like, I say to my kids, don't tell, ask, because questions are like keys. They unlock things, and they'll help you. They'll open doors. When you tell, you lose the ability to do that. So that consultation piece, and here in Victoria, they're very, very proud of the fact that they lobbied really, really hard to get more powers for HSRs in the Act than anywhere else in Australia. So they're always very solid on ensuring that the HSR gets a voice and they get that representation of the work group. And I learned a lot from that experience, and I learned about the power of that consultation.
And if you don't mind me adding, I think what we've found over the last certainly 30 years, we've lost the art of good consultation. And again, it's a legal requirement. The challenge that we've got today, and I was talking to a guy that's really well respected, is a QC in WHS law in Australia. And he said, the people who provide off-the-shelf swims for people in construction should be locked up and the key should be thrown away, because they are getting in the way of meaningful consultation, because legislation requires that nobody should be putting a procedure together without full consultation with their workforce or with their HSR, who's a representation of the workforce. And when you can go to any organisation online or Officeworks and you can buy something off the shelf, not only is it illegal, it's absolutely driving a wedge between what industry is actually needing, which is better consultation with the workforce that are undertaking the work. So I think there's some great opportunity that when people understand what not only their legal duty, but what's good for business. And again, it comes back to the renovation, right? If you can't do a renovation without a builder asking you, what do you want to get rid of and what do you want to keep? So it's a co-design. If we look at everything through a co-design lens and going with a humble inquiry, approach, which is a great book if anybody wants to Google Humble Inquiry. It's a phenomenal book to help people understand how to go into a conversation that you'll probably come out learning more than you would have done otherwise.
Yeah. So what are you excited about, Phil? The next, few months as you push into next year, what are you looking forward to getting involved in?
Christmas.
And some time
Christmas
with the kids.
pudding.
No, honestly, decorations are going up on the weekend. Kids are going nuts about it. We've got to order advent calendars, all sorts going on. But on the work front, I'm looking forward to. I think Brody and I have spoken about this over coffee many times. We're very, very lucky people because, and again, it comes down to that frame of mind and how you choose to view things. But work is not really work for me. I'm very lucky. I enjoy what I do so much that I don't feel like it's a chore or a burden to get out of bed in the morning and to do what I do. So I'm excited about continuing to have the opportunity to do something that I really enjoy. That's one of my big motivations. I'm excited about asking more questions to learn about what I do. I've been consulting for 12 months, so obviously still getting into it. But I am really enjoying the challenge of observing the market and looking at what people do, spotting the gaps, spotting the opportunities, finding out where I can add value, continuing to talk to people who I can, get some knowledge and wisdom from. And to continue to partner, make some strategic partnerships with larger entities to leverage the combined skill sets of both parties.
Awesome. Sounds great. And how can people find you, Phil, if they want to engage with you? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Just look for the nearest castle and I'll probably be there.
with the pile of Lego next to it.
No, the easiest way is LinkedIn. Maybe jump on LinkedIn. You can find me there, and a lot of people have reached out and reconnected with a lot of people, which has been great, and obviously made some new friends and acquaintances too.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed that chat. I'm excited about the prospect of working with you and Brody into the future as we tackle these industry problems. Thank you both for jumping in and joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.